First of all, can you introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, and why that makes you a suitable candidate to represent them in Westminster?
Hello, I'm Councillor Nicola Day. I'm leader of the Green Group on Peterborough City Council, and I'm also the Green Party parliamentary candidate. I just want to let you know a bit about my background. So, I moved to Peterborough at 4 months old. My dad gained work here to electrify the railways for Balfour Beatty. I've lived and worked in Peterborough most of my life. My son has grown up here and now teaches himself in local primary schools. And I myself teach English at ICRA Academy and supply teach in other secondary schools across the city. I meet so many young people in Peterborough, and I'm so proud of all of them. And we have some fantastic skills from our younger generation that are going to go forward. Peterborough has given me so much. As a young parent, I did my degree at Peterborough Regional College, and then I went on to do my PGC at Cambridge University to become a teacher. Peterborough's been a home to me and my son. I've got many of my best friends here, good friends here. And it's given me a sense, Peterborough, of wanting to give back and to be a hard-working representative and strong voice for this city. Peterborough has so much to offer and often doesn't have the confidence it should have. We have some amazing buildings, architecture, and infrastructure, but there are areas and issues that are neglected and forgotten. And I'm very determined to address those issues and be the creator of change, of placemaking, and of building links between our communities. And listening to residents, I'm really keen to listen and understand. I've been a councillor for 5 years. I've always listened and I'm always interested in building grassroots democracy. So, holding things like citizens and people's assemblies to give local people a voice about resources and regeneration of the city. I'm also keen to stand because I believe that the green policies are the right policies for Peterborough and for the UK. We want to clean up our rivers and seas, invest in our NHS by taxing the super rich. We want to invest in our public services, retrofit our homes, and build 150,000 new council homes per year in the UK, as well as bringing in rent controls so that wages can keep pace with rents. These truly are policies worth fighting for. Labour and the Conservatives have not been honest about the level of investment the UK actually needs. I will be honest about that, and I will be a strong voice for our city.
Peterborough Council's funding from central government has been cut by over 37% in real terms since 2016 and 70% since 2013. The result of these cuts have been cuts in services and a rising council tax of over 40%. What will you and your party do to ensure the city gains the financial support it requires to continue to provide the services that its citizens want and need?
So the Green Party would fund public services fairly. We cannot continue with funding cuts of, as you mentioned, 70% since 2013. And I sit on the Financial Sustainability Working Group, and we've seen the pressures that we're under as a council. So rather than taxing wealth fairly, the other parties are refusing to rule out further cuts and instead of bending to pressure from excessively high earners, the city and newspaper barons, all at the expense of the future of the country. 64% of people support maintaining or increasing taxes rather than cutting public services. So I've already spoken about our wealth tax previously. Only a very small minority would be subject to a wealth tax under the Green policy, and the overwhelming majority would benefit. And we do believe that we can raise between 50 to 70 billion by taxing the wealthiest 1 to 2%, and we would put these not only into our NHS, but we would also use this to invest in our public services. In terms of council tax, the Green Party has always opposed the council tax. We think it's a regressive tax that shifts emphasis away from a local tax on property. Greens would champion a fair system for taxing landowners. Our long-term policy is a land value tax so that those with the most valuable and largest land holdings would contribute the most, and we would end council tax. We would implement a survey of all land holdings to pave the way for a fair taxation of land. And instead of the unfair council tax that we currently have, that is the green policy in our manifesto.
It's been said that Peterborough is an NHS dental desert, with people having to travel 50 miles to find one. There are also constant complaints about the difficulties of getting an appointment at the city's GPs, with appointments for the day gone by 1 minute past 8. What will you do to see a rapid improvement to this situation?
I absolutely agree with you. I've got an NHS dentist, and I actually had to stagger some dental work because I couldn't afford to pay it all in one go. So 1 month I had one part of the dental work, and then I had to wait. So my dentist is not an NHS dentist, and I completely appreciate the trouble that local people are having. So, as stated previously, we would massively invest in our NHS. Successive governments, we feel, have failed to properly fund the NHS dentistry, expecting dentists to treat patients at a loss. Elected Green MPs will push for a new contract for NHS dentists that ensures everybody who needs an NHS dentist has access to one. We would put an additional investment into NHS dentistry, reaching £3 billion a year by 2030. This would transform the availability of appointments and end the scandal of dental treatment deserts. The NHS crisis is not an accident. It is the result of deliberate Conservative underfunding that has seen the NHS under risk of collapse. So the Green Party has always proudly defended the NHS against this creeping privatisation, and we always will. Elected Green MPs will also push for a steady reduction in waiting lists, and we would guarantee rapid access to a GP and same-day access for urgent cases. We would boost NHS staff pay, which we know is a real issue at the moment, and we would pay doctors and nurses fairly so that we retain them and their skills. I had a doorstep conversation on a street in Peterborough last night, and there was a house with about 4 NHS workers, overseas skilled workers that had come to the UK to work. And we had a really long conversation, and they were basically saying that we're not paid enough over here. We can't afford the cost of living, and we're actually going to leave because of the low pay and the excessive cost of living. So we're bringing people in, we're training them up often, and then we're losing them because we're not paying our NHS staff fairly. And the Greens would use those taxes that we've talked about to invest. Obviously, there needs to be a massive investment in the training of doctors, but also paying junior doctors fairly, paying doctors and nurses fairly is a strong policy of ours.
Peterborough's population grew by 17% between 2011 and 2021, the third fastest growth in the country. What's your plan or policy on where housing should be built in and around the city over the next 10 years?
Well, that's a really good question for me because I sit as the Green Party representative on the local plan working group at the council. And the local plan is all about where we might build houses and put businesses. And this is a question that I'm actually tackling because I know Green councillors up and down the country have changed the word growth in their local plans to prosperity. Because there's no point, I feel, in endless growth and home building if there are not the leisure and cultural facilities for local residents to enjoy or the job prospects. So we need to make sure we have a balance of those things. And I've certainly talked about in the very first meeting of that local plan group, I've talked about the need for prosperity. And obviously as a Green, we don't want to see unfettered growth. We know that capitalism and neoliberalism is causing the destruction of our planet. So Greens would redefine the concept of growth with prosperity. And Greens will support local councils to provide good quality, affordable social housing. But we will ensure that large-scale developments are always supported by new infrastructure such as GP surgeries, bus services and extra places at nurseries and schools. We already know that where large developments are planned, local residents are very concerned about the lack of infrastructure. So the Greens have that as a right homes, right places charter, and we have that policy within that charter and within our manifesto. We will also transform the planning system to reduce the environmental impact of construction and to require local authorities to spread small developments across areas rather than build huge new estates. Greens are also committed to protecting the green belt and ensuring everyone has access to green space. And we will campaign to change building regulations so all new homes meet Passive House or equivalent standards. And actually here in Peterborough, we managed to secure as Greens a £2 million Eco Homes project. And we believe it's a small project, but we believe that kind of project needs uplifting and upscaling. And those homes would be for social housing and temporary accommodation.
A report produced last year stated that for the city to reach net zero, it would cost in the region of £8.8 billion. What action will you take to promote environmental sustainability and address climate change locally without bankrupting the council?
Okay, so the report estimated this cost. I know because I chair the Climate Change and Environment Committee, but this is not cost that the council would have to pay, and it's also a cost over a number of years. And we would look both to public and private investment to cover this cost. It wouldn't just be public finance, publicly funded. Now, one of the most underestimated lines in our manifesto is this: since the last election, there has been an increasing number of days and months in which global temperatures increases have breached 1.5 degrees, an increase that would make human life on Earth unlivable. And I just wanted to repeat that line again. So increases have breached 1.5 degrees, an increase that would make human life on Earth unlivable. Now, not many media have picked up on that. Not much of the media has picked up on that or talked about that. But that's absolutely what's going to happen. So do we want to destroy ourselves? As the neoliberal agenda has on the cards for us, or where globalization and rampant capitalism is destroying our planet and our home. So a green economic transformation would bring cleaner, cheaper energy and millions of rewarding, well-paid jobs. We feel as Greens, a large-scale, long-term programme of investment. And these programmes to insulate homes, to retrofit buildings, to electrify our transport, to develop active travel, to improve our water and sewage infrastructure would come under the Greens via central government funding and would not bankrupt councils.
The regional pool was closed for good last year, leaving the city 15 lanes short of what's required. What will you do to help the council replace the pool? Should a 50-metre pool be a requirement when it is replaced? And should the plans include a hydrotherapy pool?
I've said this before, and I just find it so beyond depressing that we now don't have a regional pool in the city the size of Peterborough. And the Lido has come in and been fantastic, but actually we really need an indoor regional pool, not only for the health of our city, but also for the clubs that utilise that pool. I would love to, and I would work really hard as MP for the city to find out where funding is. I would go to the combined authority. I would obviously approach Sports England and work with all stakeholders across the city to secure investment to build a pool. Now, where exactly that pool should be, personally, I feel that the regional pool base was a great base already. We know it will cost money to sort of take that pool down, but I would like to see it replaced in the same location if possible, because I think it's a very accessible location. I had a lovely email from the St George's campaign when they tweeted about a new regional pool having a Lido. I mean, I'd love to see a facility that is 50 metres, that has diving facilities, deep water, so that deep water aqua activities can take place. And it would be fantastic to have a hydrotherapy pool as part of that complex. I mean, if we're building something that's going to be magnificent and groundbreaking, then I think it should cater for the needs of both the able-bodied and the disabled community. I am aware that there is a new pool plan now through Thistlemore Drive Medical Practice, but that will be a private facility. We're not sure yet how affordable that will be for people. And one thing that St George's campaign has really insisted to us as councillors and leaders of groups was that the cost of people attending St George's was really reasonable for users. So I'm going to be keeping an eye both on the Thistlemore Medical Practice hydrotherapy pool, but if we are going to bring something into Peterborough and rebuild a pool, let's do it properly. It is, and have really high ambition for our city about that facility. I mean, I asked a question before I was a councillor, a long time before I was a Green councillor, to the council at full council, and this was about 10 or even longer, 14 years ago. Why are we not maintaining our regional pool? And I'd got a response to say, actually, we've invested this and this. But all it felt to me was that there was some new shower changing curtains and some new lockers. You know, the pool itself was dated, I have to say. It was dated. And I feel we should have looked at this. Our previous administration should have looked at this issue a lot earlier. And therefore, I mean, unfortunately, the rack was nobody's problem, the rack that was found in the building. But unfortunately, by not realising that we probably needed a new facility a long time ago, that's not really helped the situation out now when we know that councils are really struggling financially.
Peterborough City Council is in no overall control, with Labour the third party to lead the council in the last 12 months, but with just 19 of 60 councillors. How will you work with the council to ensure political stability?
Okay, so we will talk. We talk to Labour, sort of post the during and post the negotiation process. We are chairing, as a Green Group of 4 councillors, we are chairing 2 committees, and it's always it's the right practice for opposition groups to be chairing scrutiny committees so that we can hold the cabinet members to account. So absolutely, we'll be supportive where we can be and where we need to be, but also we will, we will scrutinise and we will ask questions and hold that council administration to account, just as we would with any other council. But we do talk as group leaders, we do talk as opposition groups. And as Greens, we certainly asked for lots of the policies and projects that we've got underway at the moment to support the Labour leadership bid. We asked for those policies to be supported. We didn't get a definitive answer on that, and therefore we abstained, with one of us voting against when we supported the leadership bid, which is, Greens don't have a whip, so we have every right to vote differently if we feel that is needed. But I think that was a message to say, look, there are things that we're asking for as well, and we are in a position of support, but also in a position that we need to scrutinise where we need to as well.
In 2022, a master plan for the redevelopment of the embankment was produced, which included the option to include a new arena, which would also function as a concert venue and stadium for Peterborough United. What is your position on the proposal, and what will you do to drive forward the embankment redevelopment in general?
Okay, so as Greens, I've already mentioned that we would be protecting green space. And what you've got to realise about the embankment is there are lots of people living in flats, both around the Eastgate area, around the St Mary's Court area, as well as Fletton Quays, that do not have gardens. And even for people, obviously many residents for walking their dogs or, having access to that green space. We know during the pandemic that was absolutely vital for people to be able to take walks in green spaces. The Green Party locally is opposed to building a huge embankment on a huge stadium on the embankment. We don't feel that's the right location. We feel it needs to be protected as open green space. We know that we utilise that for the beer festival. We hear talk from the football ground, from the football team, well, actually it will only be a small area and you'll have lots of green space still. But if you think about building a 25,000 seater arena, you are going to need parking facilities, and I do not feel that green space would be protected, and there would only be a very small parcel of it left. Now, I understand the football team's need for potentially a new stadium in the future, but what we're saying is, yes, have a new stadium, but please not on the green space, which actually belongs to the public and the residents of this city. We don't think the embankment is perfect. Greens, I've already been working with the council and with officers on plans for the embankment and putting forward ideas. For example, making the embankment more accessible. So there should be a footpath for disabled access from Bishop Road's car park going to the embankment on the Key Theatre side of the embankment. There should be some lighting. There should be potentially some toilets. I know toilets are always a difficult issue, but some of those pod toilets, because people won't use the facility unless there are some very basic facilities. I've also talked about, I've often enjoyed the river myself. I know people that own boats. We also talked about bringing the embankment up to standard with better mooring facilities, and actually utilising that space as a good green blue space. We as a city do not utilise that riverside. I mean, I'd hoped that by now the units under the Fletton Quays would have cafes and bars and be quite a buzz of activity. Now, we know that those plans are being brought forward and they are, being developed, and we know that there's going to be a food hub, like a box park type area. Now, all that will bring, more cultural capital, more leisure space into the city. And I do think the riverbank is underutilised. I'm not saying let's build along both sides. Let's have it completely, full of cafes and bars. I'm just saying that what's there needs to be populated. And also we need to bring the embankment up to scratch. And there are lots of ideas around how we could do that. And I've just offered just a few of those. But those are the Green Party local policies on that.
What is the biggest challenge facing Peterborough over the next 5 years?
So I feel for Peterborough over the next 5 years, as a predominantly working class city, I feel that it's housing and the cost of living crisis. So In Peterborough at the moment, the number of residents waiting for social housing exceeds the supply. So there are 2,558 people who have been waiting for a home since September 2023. There are actually 1 million people on the waiting list across the UK on council waiting lists. So there is a massive housing crisis. We know that young people are living longer and longer at home because they can't afford their own homes. Now, Green MPs will push to provide 150,000 new council homes per year and end the right to buy on this stock of housing so that homes can belong to communities forever. We know that because of previous policies of right to buy, we do not have the council stock, and this is where partly this is the cause of the housing crisis. We would also empower local councils to introduce rent control so that people can afford to rent. Increasingly, we're seeing that wages are not covering rental costs. People can't afford to rent and pay their energy bills and pay their food bills. So we would look to give councils the power to bring in rent controls. We would also end no-fault evictions. We've all heard stories of people living in rented accommodation for sort of 15 years, and then all of a sudden the landlord sort of gives a no-fault eviction and that's their home gone. So we would end no-fault evictions. We would also guarantee to ensure that the new housing stock that we build would be warm, safe, and that's well insulated so that energy bills would be cheaper. And we believe that would reduce climate emissions as well as tackle fuel poverty and provide genuinely affordable housing. And that is really also linked to the cost of living crisis. This is a huge issue. We as Greens believe that we should not be needing to have people relying on food banks to feed themselves. I myself am earning money. I'm also struggling myself with the cost of living crisis. And we must remember that disastrous period of Liz Truss's government where she was bringing in unfunded tax cuts, which meant, the knee-jerk reaction from the financial sector was to increase everybody's mortgage so the rents went up. So we must remember those disastrous policies that came out of that period of the Conservative government. So the Greens would, in terms of the cost of living crisis, we would seek to introduce a minimum wage of £15 per hour for all, no matter your age. Why should an 18-year-old doing the same job as a 22-year-old be paid differently? We would increase universal credit by £40 per week. We would abolish the two-child benefit cap and lift 250,000 children out of poverty. That's something we can do overnight. We would ensure pensions are always uprated in line with inflation, because they often fall behind the rate of inflation. We would increase carers allowance by at least 10% a month, and we would scrap the bedroom tax. Now, in the long term, the Greens would like to introduce a universal basic income, and this would give everybody the security to start a business, to study, to train, to live a life in dignity. That would cover the basic costs of living, or most of the basic costs of living for people. And elected Greens, you can rest assured, will take every opportunity to advocate for the most disadvantaged in society.
Finally, why are you and your party the best choice for people to give their vote to this year?
We Greens recognise that we have an NHS that is severely overstretched. We have people struggling to access to doctor and dentist appointments. We've got housing crisis. We've got sewage in our rivers. We've got bills escalating in energy and food. And all of these things need investment if we are to tackle the cost of living crisis. If we are to create the jobs we can create by insulating people's homes, investing in renewable energy, and if we are to put the investment in that is needed to both defend and restore our NHS and social care sector. And we are setting out a vision for how that can be done, because sadly, there is silence from Labour and Conservatives about the fact that, as the Institute for Fiscal Studies has said, the next government is either going to have to cut services or increase taxes. And the Green Party is setting out a vision by asking those with the broadest shoulders to pay modestly more in tax in a way that will enable us all to benefit. Now, these taxes are quite mainstream by European standards, and we can't expect to have those European standards in our country if we're not prepared to ask those with the broadest shoulders to pay modestly more. We have solutions that will bring down these costs for everyone's benefit, and we desperately need more Green MPs in the next Parliament to hold the next potentially Labour government to account and to push for these policies. So with that, I will wrap it up and just say, for a fairer, greener future, for real hope, for real change, vote Green, vote Nicola Day on the 4th of July.
Nicola Day, Green Party candidate for Peterborough. Thank you for joining me on the politics of Peterborough.
Thank you.